Millionaire seeks a pretend girlfriend to impress his ex, but he never imagined he'd fall in love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The gray sky hung low over the city of Austin, and a fine drizzle painted the sidewalks with silver light. Inside a small law school cafe, Ethan Cole, a 33-year-old millionaire and chief executive officer of Cole and Harrington Group, sat alone by the window. His tailored suit looked perfect, yet his eyes carried the weight of exhaustion that no amount of wealth could hide. On his phone screen glowed a single message from his ex-fiancée, Sabrina Hill. "See you at my engagement party next week." He read it twice, jaw tight. Her wedding announcement had gone viral that morning. She was marrying the man who once tried to buy out Ethan's company. The press called it poetic justice. To Ethan, it felt like a slow, public execution of pride. That was when his assistant, Mara, approached the table. "Sir, the reporters are asking if you will attend." "Should I respond?" Ethan stared at his coffee, silent for a moment. Then he said, "Tell them I will be there, and tell them I will not be alone." Across town, Lila Tran, 26, stood in the kitchen of a tiny apartment she shared with her mother. The apartment smelled faintly of ginger tea and detergent. Lila had just been fired from her job at a downtown restaurant after defending a coworker who was short on tips. Her mother's medicine bottles lined the counter like soldiers waiting for orders. The rent notice hung crooked on the fridge. She tried to stay cheerful, humming as she poured soup into a bowl. But her hands trembled when she saw the unpaid hospital bill tucked under a magnet. She whispered, "Do not worry, Mom. I will figure something out." Later that evening, she walked to the same cafe where Ethan sat, hoping to ask the manager for any open position. Her worn coat dripped with rain as she stepped inside, the scent of roasted coffee filling the air. Ethan glanced up, his sharp eyes softening for a second when he saw her. She looked out of place among the sleek customers, her hair damp, her shoes muddy, yet her face calm and steady. Mara leaned toward him and murmured, "Sir, we still have no one confirmed for the party." Everyone declined. Ethan looked back at the young woman standing near the counter. An idea struck him strange, sudden, reckless. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep but polite. "You work here?" She blinked, startled. "No, I was hoping to apply, but I think the position is already taken." He studied her for a moment. There was something honest in her tone, unpolished but warm. "What is your name?" "Lila Tran." He nodded once. "Lila, I have a proposal. It may sound unusual, but hear me out. I need someone to accompany me to a formal event this weekend. It is not a date, it is a contract." She frowned. "A contract?" "Yes," he replied calmly. "A pretend relationship. I will compensate you $10,000 for the weekend. You only have to attend 3 events with me and act as if we are together." Lila laughed, thinking he must be joking. "You are serious?" "I am. And why me?" He shrugged lightly. "Because you look like the only person here who would tell me the truth." "Oh." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the espresso machine. Lila crossed her arms. "Let me guess. This is to make someone jealous." Ethan smiled faintly. "You are quick." "Yes, something like that." She shook her head. "That is the strangest job offer I have ever heard." "Then you will not accept?" he asked. She hesitated. The number echoed in her mind, $10,000. It was more than enough to pay the hospital bills and rent for months. Her throat tightened. "If this is real, I want a written agreement." Ethan's eyes glimmered with approval. "Good. You have a sense of business. Meet me tomorrow at my office. 9 o'clock sharp. We will make it official." He handed her a sleek black business card, embossed with his name. When she looked up, he was already walking away, his reflection fading in the cafe window like a ghost in tailored gray. Outside, the drizzle turned to rain. She whispered, "What did I just agree to?" Far above the city, in his penthouse overlooking the shimmering lights of downtown, Ethan poured himself a glass of bourbon. He stared out the window, watching the raindrops crawl down the glass. He did not believe in accidents. He believed in timing. And something about that woman's quiet courage had just rewritten his weekend and maybe his life. The rain kept falling, steady and cold, as two strangers unknowingly signed their fates in different corners of the same city. The next morning, the city air was cool and bright after the night's rain. Lila stood outside the tall glass tower that housed Cole and Harrington Group. The building stretched into the sky like a blade of light. She looked down at her reflection in the marble floor of the lobby, clutching her worn handbag. Her pulse quickened. For a woman who had spent the last 3 years working in diners and coffee shops, this place felt like another world. A receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, with Mr. Ethan Cole," Lila replied, forcing her voice to stay calm. "32nd floor. He is expecting you." The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor that blinked by seemed to count her doubts. By the time the doors opened, she had rehearsed a dozen ways to back out. But then she saw him. Ethan stood near the window, backlit by the city skyline, the morning sun tracing the sharp lines of his suit. He turned when she entered. "You are punctual. That is a good sign." Lila tried to smile. "I almost changed my mind." "Then I am glad you did not." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. On the polished surface lay a folder, a pen, and a steaming cup of coffee. "Cream and sugar, right? I asked the cafe downstairs to send your usual order." "Oh." Her eyes widened. "How did you—" "I notice things," he said simply. "Now, let us review the terms." He opened the folder and read, voice steady. 1. You will accompany me to 3 events this weekend. A charity dinner on Friday evening, a private cocktail gathering on Saturday, and an engagement party on Sunday. 2. You will act as my girlfriend in public. 3. There will be no physical relationship. 4. You will not discuss this arrangement with anyone. And 5. The total payment will be $10,000, wired to your account immediately after the final event. Lila stared at the paper. Every word looked perfectly legal and perfectly insane. "So, this is really happening." Ethan met her gaze. "Only if you sign." She hesitated, then said softly, "Why me, Mr. Cole? You could hire a model or an actress." He leaned back, thoughtful. "Because they would play a role. You do not know how to pretend. That is what I need." She exhaled slowly. The paper trembled in her hand as she read the clauses again. She could almost see her mother's face, pale from the hospital bed, whispering that everything would be fine. Maybe this was the miracle she had been waiting for. "I will do it," she said finally. Ethan nodded once, handed her the pen, and watched as she signed her name in neat, careful strokes. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Tran." He reached into a small velvet box and lifted a delicate sapphire necklace. "This will make the role believable. You will wear it at every event." She blinked. "That looks expensive." "It is," he replied. "Consider it a loan until Sunday." She held the necklace carefully, the stone catching the light like a tiny piece of ocean. For a moment, she forgot this was a contract. It felt like a promise. Ethan rose and walked around the desk, standing beside her. "My driver will pick you up at 7 on Friday evening. The stylist will prepare your wardrobe. Everything else I will handle." When she turned to leave, he said quietly, "Lila, one more thing. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can walk away. The money will still be yours." That stopped her. No one had ever offered her a way out before. She looked at him, trying to understand the man behind the calm voice and perfect suit. "Thank you," she said, her tone almost a whisper. He gave a small nod. "See you Friday." Outside, the Texas sun had broken through the clouds. Lila stepped onto the sidewalk, her heart unsteady but alive. She looked up at the building, at the floor where he stood, and wondered what kind of person offered a stranger $10,000 just to play pretend. Back in his office, Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd below. Mara, his assistant, entered quietly. "Is she the one?" "Yes," he said. "Do you think it will work?" He looked out at the city. "It has to." As Lila walked home, she held the folder tight against her chest. The ink on her signature was still drying, and her mind spun with questions she could not yet name. She had no idea that a single signature had just rewritten both of their lives. And somewhere high above, Ethan poured another cup of coffee, his reflection overlapping the skyline. He told himself this was business, nothing more. But the steady beat in his chest said otherwise. The weekend had not even begun, and already, something about her had changed the air in the room. Friday arrived faster than Lila expected. She spent the morning helping her mother with breakfast, pretending that everything was normal. When her mother asked how the job search was going, she forced a smile and said, "Something came up. It might help us for a while." She did not dare to explain the truth. By late afternoon, a black car waited outside their apartment complex. The driver, polite and silent, opened the door and handed her a sealed envelope with Ethan's company logo. Inside were 2 event passes, a schedule, and a note written in neat handwriting. "Remember, confidence is the best disguise. 7 o'clock sharp." At 6:30, Lila stood in front of a full-length mirror at a downtown boutique, barely recognizing herself. The stylist had chosen an elegant navy gown that shimmered under the light, its neckline simple yet graceful. Her hair was pinned up, and a hint of makeup softened her features. When the sapphire necklace rested against her collarbone, she drew a quiet breath. For the first time in years, she looked like someone who belonged in a room of chandeliers. Ethan arrived precisely at 7. He wore a charcoal suit and carried an air of effortless control. When he saw her, something in his eyes flickered quick, unreadable. "You clean up well," he said, voice low but sincere. Lila smiled slightly. "So do you. But I think you already knew that." Ugh. As they stepped into the limousine, she noticed how carefully he maintained distance, formal, measured. The car moved through downtown traffic, neon lights reflecting off the windows. "You have done this before?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I do not usually fake things." She looked at him, curious. "Then why start now?" He turned to the window. "Because sometimes, pretending is easier than explaining pain." "Oh." The car stopped in front of the Hyatt Grand, where the charity dinner was held. Cameras flashed as guests arrived. Ethan offered his arm. "Ready?" "Not even close," she whispered, placing her hand on his sleeve. Inside the ballroom, golden light spilled across polished marble floors. Waiters in white gloves moved between tables. Lila's pulse raced as whispers followed them. "That is Ethan Cole," someone murmured. "And who is she?" They reached the main table, where several executives and board members greeted Ethan warmly. He introduced Lila with calm precision. "This is my partner, Lila Tran." Her smile was steady, her posture perfect, though her heart pounded like a drum. When she glanced at Ethan, he gave a small approving nod. Dinner passed in a blur of conversations about stocks, mergers, and philanthropy. Lila barely spoke, afraid to reveal her inexperience. Yet each time she felt lost, Ethan's quiet presence anchored her. Once, when a guest made a cutting remark about young women who enjoy expensive jewelry, Ethan responded smoothly, "Some things are earned through character, not money." The table fell silent, and Lila's gratitude shone through her eyes. Later, as the orchestra began to play, Ethan led her onto the dance floor. The music was slow, a soft waltz. Lila hesitated. "I am not very good at this." He smiled faintly. "Neither am I." Oh, quote. They moved in gentle rhythm, his hand firm at her back, guiding her with ease. For a moment, the room faded away the whispers, the deal, the charade. Only the warmth of his hand and the soft scent of rain from his jacket remained. When the song ended, applause rippled around them. Lila stepped back, flushed. Was that convincing enough? Ethan's voice lowered. More than convincing. Outside the ballroom, flashes erupted as photographers caught their exit. Lila instinctively shielded her face, but Ethan placed his hand over hers. "Ignore them. It will pass." He guided her through the crowd until they reached the limousine again. In the quiet of the car, she exhaled. "Do they always treat you like that?" He looked out the window, thoughtful. "Success has a strange way of turning people into stories. They write what fits their version, not yours." She nodded slowly. "I guess tonight I became one of those stories too." He turned to her. "Not for long, you did well, Lila." When the car stopped in front of her apartment, she expected him to stay silent. Instead, he said softly, "You have a way of making people look twice, even when they think they should not." She hesitated, hand on the door handle. "That sounds like a compliment." "It is," he said simply. "Good night." Lila stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights painting soft halos on the wet pavement. The car pulled away, its taillights fading into the distance. She touched the sapphire at her neck, its weight both strange and comforting. Inside the apartment, her mother was already asleep. Lila stood by the window, still wearing the gown, still hearing the faint echo of music in her mind. Somewhere between the lies and the lights, she had felt something real, and that terrified her more than anything. Across town, Ethan loosened his tie and poured a glass of bourbon in his penthouse. He told himself it was just the first event, just the beginning of a weekend arrangement. Yet when he closed his eyes, he could still see her smile, bright and unguarded, cutting through the noise like a beam of truth. Saturday morning arrived with soft sunlight pouring through Lila's window. She woke to a message from Ethan. "Car at 10, casual brunch, dress comfortably." Her pulse quickened as she read it twice. She could almost hear his calm voice behind those words. 2 hours later, the black car pulled up again. Ethan was already inside, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark jeans. Gone was the stern businessman from the night before. He looked almost relaxed. "Good morning," he said, opening the door for her. "Ready for day 2 of the performance?" She smiled nervously. "If I trip or say something wrong, you will not fire me, right?" He chuckled, surprising her. "No firing today, just brunch and polite conversation." The restaurant sat on a rooftop overlooking the Colorado River. Potted plants lined the glass railing, and soft jazz played in the background. It was the kind of place where every plate looked like art. When the hostess greeted them, Ethan placed a gentle hand on Lila's back, a silent cue for the cameras nearby. Reporters were seated a few tables away, pretending not to stare. Lila straightened her posture, forcing herself to appear calm. Ethan guided her to the table, ordering for both of them with practiced ease. 2 cappuccinos and the chef's breakfast special, he told the waiter. As the food arrived, Lila glanced at the skyline. "You really live like this every day?" He shrugged. "You get used to it. But sometimes it feels empty." She looked at him, curious. "Empty? You have everything." Ethan stirred his coffee slowly. "Everything does not mean peace." For a moment, the act fell away. There were no cameras, no lies, only 2 people sharing silence that felt strangely honest. Then a familiar voice cut through the air. "Ethan." They both turned. Standing near the entrance was Sabrina Hill, his ex-fiancée, elegant in a white dress, her diamond ring catching the sunlight. She smiled too sweetly. "What a surprise. And who is this?" Ethan rose, every muscle tightening. "Sabrina. This is Lila Tran." Lila extended a polite hand. "Nice to meet you." "Oh." Sabrina's eyes flicked to the necklace, recognition flashing instantly. "That piece looks familiar. You always had good taste, Ethan." Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks. Ethan's voice remained steady. "We should go. We have another appointment." He placed money on the table and guided Lila toward the exit. Outside, the wind off the river cooled her burning face. "That was your ex, was it not?" "Yes," he said quietly. "And now she knows exactly what I wanted her to know." 0. Lila met his gaze. "Then congratulations. The show is working." He looked away, jaw tight. "Maybe, but it does not feel like a show anymore." Neither of them spoke during the drive back. The city moved past the window, bright and alive, while both of them sat in silence, 2 strangers bound by a lie that was starting to feel dangerously real. Sunday evening arrived wrapped in the glow of city lights. The engagement party was being held at the Hill family estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by marble fountains and manicured gardens. Lila sat in the limousine beside Ethan, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The sapphire necklace glimmered softly against her skin. "This is it," Ethan said quietly. "The last act." Lila managed a nervous smile. "You mean the grand finale." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Let us just get through tonight." "Oh." When they entered the ballroom, every head turned. The room glittered with chandeliers and champagne glasses. Sabrina stood near the stage, radiant beside her fiancé, a venture capitalist twice her age. Her gaze lingered on Ethan and Lila, sharp as glass. Ethan placed his hand lightly at Lila's back, guiding her through the crowd. "Smile," he whispered. "Everyone here feeds on confidence." She took a steady breath and nodded. "Then let us give them a show." They moved together with practiced grace, greeting investors, shaking hands, exchanging polite words that hid unspoken tension. When a journalist approached with a camera, Ethan drew Lila closer. "A picture?" the man asked. "Of course," Ethan said smoothly. His arm slipped around her waist as the flash went off. For one heartbeat, their eyes met. The world around them blurred, and the act felt less like pretending. The music swelled as the host announced a toast to love and new beginnings. Sabrina raised her glass and smiled in Ethan's direction. "To the ones who taught us what love is and what it is not." Laughter rippled through the crowd, subtle but cutting. Lila felt the sting but held her head high. She leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "She wants to see you flinch. Do not give her that." He glanced at her, surprised by the quiet strength in her tone. "I am beginning to see why I chose you." As the evening ended, Ethan escorted Lila to the balcony overlooking the garden. The night air carried the faint scent of roses. She looked up at him. Was it worth it? He hesitated, then said softly, "Ask me tomorrow." For a long moment, neither moved. The sound of distant laughter floated through the open doors. Then Ethan reached for her hand, not as part of the act, but as something fragile and true. "Thank you, Lila," he said, "for helping me survive tonight." She met his gaze. "You did not just survive, Ethan. You took back your dignity." The music from the ballroom faded as they stood there, two actors at the edge of a story that no longer felt scripted. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Ethan's penthouse, soft and golden. The weekend was over, but the quiet between them lingered like an unfinished sentence. Lila stood by the wide glass window, looking down at the city that seemed smaller from this height. She still wore the sapphire necklace, though she knew the contract had technically ended. Ethan walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "Cream and sugar, right?" he asked. She smiled faintly, surprised he remembered. "You pay attention to details." "I try," he said, handing her the cup. "You did well this weekend, better than I expected." "Thank you," she replied, her tone careful. "So, what happens now?" He hesitated before answering. "Now, I transfer the payment to your account, and we go back to our own lives. That was the deal." Lila nodded, pretending the words did not sting. "Of course. A deal is a deal." She turned toward the window again. "You got what you wanted. Your ex saw you happy." Ethan's voice was quiet. "And you got what you needed. $10,000. "Yes," she said softly. "We both win." But neither of them felt like winners. Ethan set down his cup, studying her reflection in the glass. "You are not the same woman I met in that cafe. And you are not the man I expected to find behind all that money," she said. "But I guess that is what pretending does, it blurs the lines." A moment of silence hung between them, heavy but not hostile. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, and his face hardened. "What is it?" she asked. He showed her the screen. A news alert glowed across the display. "Ethan Cole spotted with unknown woman after secret breakup scandal." Beneath it was a blurry photo from last night's party, Ethan and Lila on the balcony, his hand in hers. His stomach dropped. "Someone was watching us?" "Always," he muttered. "Sabrina must have planted them. She wants to humiliate me again." Lila's voice trembled. "Then my face is everywhere now?" "Yes," he said grimly. "And if the board sees this before I explain, they will think I used company funds for personal reasons." She backed away, fear rising. "You said this was supposed to be private." "It was," he said, frustrated. "But I cannot control the press." She shook her head. "I did not sign up to be part of another scandal, Ethan. My mother watches the news every morning. What do I tell her?" He took a step closer. "Tell her the truth. That you helped someone who lost his way." For a moment, she wanted to believe him. But the headlines replayed in her mind: unknown woman, scandal, fake relationship. She grabbed her purse. "I should go." "Lila, wait." She turned, her eyes bright with hurt. "You think you can buy control of everything, but not people, Ethan. Not me." The elevator doors closed between them before he could answer. Down on the street, the city noise swallowed her thoughts. Every billboard and screen seemed to mock her. She walked fast, holding back tears, the sapphire necklace cold against her skin. Back in the penthouse, Ethan stared at the door she had just left through. His assistant Mara entered quietly. "Sir, the media requests a statement." He rubbed his temples. "Tell them nothing yet." She hesitated. "Do you want me to send the transfer to Miss Tran's account?" He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. I owe her more than money." That evening, as the sun dipped low over Austin, Lila sat alone in her apartment, the news still flashing on her phone. Her mother called from the bedroom, asking if she was all right. Lila forced her voice to stay even. "Yes, Mom, just tired." She set the phone face down and looked at the necklace one last time. It had once felt like a symbol of promise. Now it felt like a chain. She unclasped it and placed it gently into a box. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the sky. Somewhere above that storm, Ethan stood at his window, his reflection merging with the clouds. For the first time, he realized the truth he had been avoiding all along. The contract was over, but the feelings were not. 3 days later, the Cole and Harrington Foundation held a public press conference at the downtown convention hall. Cameras filled the room, reporters lined every aisle, and the air buzzed with curiosity. Ethan stood behind the podium in a navy suit, looking calm but resolute. For the first time in years, he had no script, no lawyer, and no fear of losing everything. He began slowly, his voice steady. "There has been much speculation about my personal life this week. I will not deny the photographs or the relationship shown in them. What I will say is that the woman in those images, Miss Lila Tran, deserves none of the disrespect or assumptions that have followed her name. She was not seeking fame or fortune. She showed me integrity when I had forgotten what it meant." The crowd murmured, flashbulbs exploding like fireworks. Ethan continued, his tone firm but sincere. "I have decided to step back from my role as Chief Executive Officer temporarily. I will dedicate my time to expanding our charitable division, an initiative inspired by Miss Tran's compassion and her belief that kindness is not weakness. The first project will fund medical care for working families across Texas." A reporter called out, "Are you saying this woman changed you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes. In more ways than I can ever explain." Across town, Lila watched the broadcast on an old television in the cafe where she used to work. Her coworker turned up the volume. When Ethan spoke her name, her breath caught. He was not defending himself, he was defending her. And in front of the world, when the press conference ended, applause echoed through the hall. Ethan stepped down from the stage, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. Outside, reporters shouted questions, but he ignored them. His car waited, but he did not get in. Instead, he looked toward the skyline, the same one she loved to stare at, and whispered, "That is my first step, Lila. The rest is up to you." That evening, the news headlines changed tone. "Ethan Cole takes responsibility, names charity after mystery woman." And for the first time since the chaos began, Lila smiled through tears. Maybe some stories could still end with dignity and maybe, just maybe, with love. 1 month later, the city of Austin shimmered under the spring Sunday. The newly opened community center, True Hearts Foundation, stood at the edge of the riverfront, a modern glass building surrounded by blooming magnolia trees. A banner stretched across the entrance that read, "Grand Opening, a promise of kindness." Crowds gathered, families laughed, and a soft breeze carried the scent of hope through the air. Inside, volunteers arranged tables of fresh flowers and handmade cards from children who had already received medical help through the foundation's early programs. Lila moved quietly among them, wearing a simple ivory dress. She now worked as the foundation's outreach director, a position Ethan had offered only after she insisted on earning it. Every step she had taken since that scandal had been a step toward reclaiming her dignity. As she adjusted a vase of daisies, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You still make the small things perfect." She turned, heart skipping. Ethan stood a few feet away, holding a single sapphire blue box. He looked different, calmer, humbler, yet still undeniably him. I was not sure you would come, she said softly. I promised I would, he replied, and I keep my promises now. They walked together through the main hall, where sunlight spilled across the marble floor. The event was nearly over, the guests beginning to leave, but the air still glowed with quiet energy. Ethan stopped near the display case at the entrance. Inside, resting on white velvet, was the sapphire necklace now labeled the symbol of integrity. I thought it belonged to you, Lila said, looking at the plaque. It belongs to the story that made me start over, he answered. But this, he lifted the small box in his hand, belongs to you. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a delicate ring of gold and sapphire, the same shade as the necklace. Her breath caught. Ethan, he smiled gently. No contracts, no pretending. Just a question that needs an honest answer. He took a slow breath, the sound of the river whispering beyond the glass walls. Will you stay not as part of an agreement, but because you believe in what we are building? Her eyes shimmered. You are asking me to stay for the foundation? Or for you? He held her gaze. They are the same thing now, because everything I build from here will have your kindness at its center. For a long moment, the world seemed still, the laughter of children outside, the flutter of banners in the wind, the quiet rhythm of two hearts, finding their way back to truth. Lila closed the box, then reached for his hand. I will stay, she said softly. Not for what was promised, but for what became real. Ethan exhaled, a smile breaking through the calm. He slipped the ring gently onto her finger. Then let us begin again, honestly this time. As the crowd outside began to cheer for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, they stepped onto the terrace together. The river glowed golden beneath the afternoon sunday. Reporters raised cameras, but this time Ethan did not hide. He stood beside Lila, proud and unafraid. When the ribbon was cut, applause rippled across the courtyard. Lila turned to him. You see, Ethan, people still believe in good stories. He looked at her, eyes warm. Then let us give them one worth remembering. The final image lingered, the two of them standing beneath the banner of True Heart's foundation, sunlight reflecting off the sapphire ring. The contract that once bound them had turned into a promise freely given. And as the wind carried petals across the water, it felt like a quiet truth settling over the city. Sometimes love begins as a performance, but only honesty can make it last forever.